called Tech, and has a interest in technology. Use that to advance our meeting. Jeffrey Blackwell, he's the director of Industries, Inc. As such, his responsibilities include the integration of emerging technology, and he also serves on the Advisory Council of the Native Public Media, a project of the National Federation of Community Broadcasters. And to him, I say welcome back. He's a former FCC employee as well as a member of the Commission's Diversity Federal Advisory Committee. He really needs no introduction to the FCC. We have Eric Broyles. Eric is founder and CEO of McGree, Inc., a social networking utility that's focusing on our connectedness, particularly with respect to nonprofits and humanitarian organizations. He's formerly with AOL and also a telecommunications attorney. Welcome, Eric. We have next to Eric, Frank Flores. He is General Manager and Chief Operating Officer of Spanish Broadcasting Systems. To you, we say bienvenidos. One of his duties is to oversee the revenue and profit of all of the Spanish Broadcast Systems radio stations. So in this case, he has a real bottom line interest in the discussion that will be taking place this morning. Unfortunately, Anita Stevens-Graham has come down with the flu and won't be able to join us this morning, but has promised to provide her comments in a written statement. So we have the benefit of her over 20 years experience in the private equity industry, and she's involved with a lot of radio transactions. We have Zamira Jones. He's President, CEO of the All-American Management Group, a company whose mission is the very thing that we will be addressing today, transforming traditional radio, its brand strength, into a multi-platform business strategy. And he is also a veteran of the broadcasting industry. He served as a VP of operations with Radio 1. So we welcome you as well and all of your expertise. Switching now to my right, we have James Winston. He's the Dean of African American Radio. He's Executive Director and General Counsel of the National Association of Black-Owned Broadcasters. He also serves on the Commission's Diversity FACA, Federal Advisory Committee, and really has been OCBO's go-to person whenever we've dealt with issues involving radio because of his knowledge and experience representing the owners and members of NABOB. So welcome. And again, no stranger to the FCC. Candida Mobley Wright is president of Voices, Inc., a radio production and syndication company of programming which reaches an unwide syndicate of radio stations. Her focus is on creative ad strategies that educate, inspire, and uplift. Welcome. Frank Montero, he is currently co-managing partner of Fletcher, Hild, and Hildreth. And again, no stranger to the Commission. He's on the Diversity FACA as well as being a former director of OCBO, and has participated many times in our workshops and roundtables here at the Commission. Cleveland Spears, he's General Manager and Program Director, I Am For the Number 4 Radio. He has an innovative radio format that builds online radio stations and produces media content for them. And he is only accessible on the internet. So we welcome him back. He's also been a friend to OCBO and participated on many of our panels before. You know, when it comes to radio, we thought about something that the great writer and American humorist Mark Twain once said when he heard a report that he had recently died. He said, "Rumors of my demise have been greatly exaggerated." Well, we hope it is the same with radio. For while radio has been beaten, battered, and bruised over these many years, it still stands and continues to provide an important outlet for local news, entertainment, and programming. What is clear, however, is that digital and interactive technologies satellite radio, internet, iPods, are changing the traditional business model and rewriting the landscape for all of communications and entertainment. Just to give you a little bit of the statistics, and I'm sure you all can fill me in here as well, in 2006, radio advertising accounted for $20.1 billion of total advertising revenue, and internet advertising accounted for $16.9 billion. Just 1 year later, however, for the first time in history, internet advertising surpassed radio when it climbed to 21.7. In 2008, internet ad revenue rose even higher. While this trend is continuing and the gap in advertising dollars is widening, it is expected that radio ads will still command $22.2 to $22.8 billion in the years 2010, 2011, respectively. In spite of this shift in advertising dollars, in 2008, 90% of all consumers aged 12 and over listened to radio at least once a week, a higher penetration rate than television, magazines, newspapers, or the internet. So that's very important to keep in mind. Today, radio must compete with a myriad of communications platforms that did not exist a mere 2 decades ago. If radio is to survive in this new business climate, it must be Darwinian. It has to adapt and it has to change. It's clear that what traditional radio embodied in format, service, and outreach to the listening audience in the last decade is not what radio is going to look like in the future if it is to thrive. Radio's unique ability to respond to and remain relevant to the local community it serves may very well be its secret to survival. As a former Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill, said, all politics is local, and we say no format is better able to keep its hands on the pulse of community than local radio. So we find that today's successful radio stations are embracing the internet and high-def radio to stay connected with their listening audience. These stations have used the internet to establish websites, newsletters, etc., other kinds of collaborations to maintain and expand their audience. They have coordinated on-air advertising campaigns with their online advertising efforts. We have assembled today a distinguished group of experts from various fields to talk about the current state of radio, just where we are today, where radio is headed, where it should be headed, and how stations can position themselves to adopt some of the successful practices that are redefining this medium and create innovative models to breathe new life into this industry. So with that, I'm going to ask Rick to start us off with just a little bit of diagnosis. Where are we? What is the current state of radio? Just let's lay out the foundation.
Let me first say thank you as well, Carolyn. I look forward to being with you this morning. I do want to emphasize as well the importance of this conversation at the Department of Commerce. Many of you may be aware that the Department of Commerce, along with the Department of Agriculture, its Rural Utility Service, are engaged now in the Obama administration's effort to deploy broadband infrastructure and increase access across the country, and we're in that process as we speak. And so we're very, very interested in this topic, not just from a communications perspective and our ability to have broadband technology across America, but also from a business perspective, the ability to maintain and sustain minority radio as job creators and businesses, thriving businesses across our country. So we thought we'd start off with just an assessment, sort of a state of play of a minority radio in America. Why is it in trouble? Small local minority radio. A number of issues, obviously, that come that we would need to discuss, whether it's consolidation, obviously access to capital, collateralization, competition from new media such as the internet, et cetera, et cetera. As Carolyn talked about, the shift in advertising dollars, what is the extent of the advertising revenue from radio to internet, and also, how long will we expect that trend to continue, and what is the significant impact? So, Jim, let's just start with you. I mean, I think you have been obviously a pioneer and an integral part and leader in this whole space. So, why is small local community radio in trouble? What is the current state of play?
Well, there are obviously many different facets that are going on in local radio. What you saw for the past decade was a consolidation of media ownership in radio, and in order to reduce costs for those consolidated groups, many group owners began doing syndicated programming to reduce costs, which took away a lot of the local news information and talent from local radio. Then you have the current recession, which has also had a very significant impact. When retailers aren't selling, they stop advertising. When they stop advertising, radio suffers greatly because it depends more than most other advertising media on local sales. So radio's taken a hit there. We've got the unique situation of the rating service. There's only one rating service in the top 150 radio markets, Arbitron. They are changing the way they measure radio in the top 50 markets. They've done 33 markets already where they've gone from diary measurements to the personal people meter, which has caused the ratings for minority formatted radio stations in the top 50, in the top 33 markets anyway, to plunge dramatically. And so we've seen that impact on radio. So there are a lot of different things impacting radio right now, and the loss of advertising to the internet is a part of that. So I think when you look at all those things happening at the same time, you see a radio industry that's under significant pressure and is going to require some new thinking in terms of how we continue to go forward and are successful.
Others, in terms of the state of play, diagnosis?
Yes, and this is a conversation that I have had with Jim in the past, and one that I kind of spoke briefly with Mr. Reed and others at FCC. One of the big challenges as an advertising agency that I see in working with the stations as they cry out for more advertising dollars, and this is both in radio and in minority print. One thing that I constantly bring up to them is that there are dollars, advertising dollars available in the federal government. The federal government is one of the top 50 advertisers in our country. And in the year 2000, President Clinton signed an executive order. And the reason this happened is because, as you remember, there was a gentleman who threatened to sue the federal government because of a bill that was actually initiated during the Nixon administration, in which a certain percentage of all the federal government advertising dollars were supposed to be targeted to minority media. Well, they did a study and they found out of the $4 billion that was spent, and I have some quotes here, that money was basically from DOD, Treasury, HHS, Interior, National Aeronautics and Space Administration. We're looking at $4 billion that over a 5-year period, DOD, which accounted for more than 50% of these advertising dollars, spent less than 2% of its advertising dollars to minority-owned broadcasters. So from my perspective, because I do a lot of advertising in the government space, these are dollars that are very difficult to get, that targeting minority communities, and they have an impact on the effectiveness of those advertising campaigns as they affect minority communities. And so that's something to look at when you're starting to talk about broadband and broadband usage and how the marketing and communication and outreach dollars are going to be spent as they are used to educate minority communities. So it kind of solves two issues. It's an educational issue as well as a minority media spend issue. Frank, you look like you're
Yeah.
jump in here.
No, yeah, if I can chime in, I mean, I agree with what the speakers have been saying. Right now, there are probably about 3 different layers of movement happening in and around the radio industry, all of which are sort of changing the dynamics of where radio fits in and what its competition is. And combined, they've made up, at least over the past, say, 8 to 10 years, or maybe 6 to 8 years, sort of this perfect storm for particularly minority radio. You have, more recently, obviously, the economic downturn, which has driven down valuations of these properties. It's hit the advertising dollars hard because, remember, just take one example. Think of car dealerships and think of how badly the car dealerships have been hit. And so those advertising dollars are drying up. And they, what I'm hearing frequently is the receivables are trailing longer and longer. People in 15 days are paying in 30 days. People are paying in 30 days are paying 60 days. So that's then putting pressure for these broadcasters under their existing loan covenants. At the same time, you have these, completely aside from the recession, which also I should mention that the recession has hit their, particularly with the minority audience, and I know I can speak for the Latino audiences, it's hit their audience very hard in the pocketbook. So, so at the same time, you have these sort of broader kind of tectonic plates moving with the entry of all these new vehicles for delivery of content, and there's a perception, I think, on the part of the investment community and the loan community that radio's not worth it anymore. There's been the capital was always difficult to begin with, but now it's gotten critical as far as the ability to access capital for some of these existing broadcasters to keep their operations going. And then you have, as Jim again pointed out, you have this attack going on by the service providers, whether it's the personal people meter, which has dramatically changed the way a lot of these stations ratings are being monitored. You've got the record industry trying to impose a performance royalty on the radio station. So they're kind of being hit in all directions, and but they do have several things still going for them. Radio, as long as it's in the dashboard, is still holds a very, very valuable place as far as being able to access their listenership. Radio, particularly with the example of Spanish radio, many of those listeners still get their news, content, information from free over-the-air radio. Radio tends to be a first mover where you have a migrating population, in the early 90s, late 90s, early 2000s. You had a real explosion in the Latino population in the Southeast, in the Carolinas, in Georgia, in Alabama, also in the Midwest, in Ohio, in Michigan, and frequently radio was one of the first movers to go into those new communities. Frequently AM radio. A lot of times it's religious AM radio, but they're some of the first movers that are there, other than the print media, to actually establish a hub around which this newly, landed migrant population can create a community to provide local information, and that's an invaluable service. But it is under attack right now, no doubt.
Samara, and then Erica.
I think Frank gave a great overview, and Jim brought up some, as well as Candida brought up some very important points. I've just come in from the front. I've been running radio stations for over 20 years and been in the business for 30, and I've run just about every format that's out there, all the urbans, the news talks, the country, all the rock formats, jazz, kids radio, ESPN. So I've seen what's happening to the business that I love. And it has, what's not unique is that all businesses go through these life cycles. and we have to remember that, the introduction, growth, maturity, decline stages. And some industries, some companies find ways to reset the clock to a new value proposition, and that's what we have to do. And so the whole idea that radio could die or is going away, it just shows that maybe we don't understand that business life cycles are a very real part of our economy. So that being said, it is a regulated industry, and so bottom line, if nothing else is remembered from what I say, the spectrum of radio needs to be protected, because we need that spectrum protection for a lot of key reasons. One, with the love of high tech going on right now, we forget that low tech has equal power. And so high tech and low tech work together to form a very cohesive bond serving the community and the economy. And Frank touched on it, but I really wanted to echo what he was saying. Secondly, we have to remember how we got here. We got here because the business did very well. Now, I'll speak as a small member of the radio community. I'll be talking about myself as well as everyone else. We enjoyed a tremendous run with radio, and it's a legacy industry. Here's an industry that was kicking off 40 to 60% margins for years, and enjoying a very exclusive right to serve the community. And we want to continue that right. But what we didn't do was we didn't invest in the future of our medium. The medium is ubiquitous. It is romantic in our economy. People have fallen in love with it, taken it for granted. And what happened was that we felt we'll always be there. And because we were ubiquitous, we are ubiquitous. And yes, we do still have over 90% of our audience still intact. Other media can't say that. And so we have really served our community well in that regard. But in the last business cycle, in the 90s, we were in that maturity, early decline stage. And really, one of the things that helped us was once consolidation was allowed through the telecom bill, it lulled us to sleep. Because what we started to do was continue that same trajectory. We didn't invest in the future. We became ingratiated with the legacy of radio, in love with our past strength, and we didn't plan for our future. We didn't invest in it, not only from a technological standpoint, but in a human condition. We did not retool our own people. So right now, there are C-level executives, general managers, salespeople, promotions people, people on the air who are serving the community, have ingratiated themselves to the marketplace, but they don't have the skills to compete in today's market. So we are going to have to reset the clock. So when I was talking about moving to a new position in the value chain, if you look at the stress fractures in our industry, we can do that, but it's going to take a yeoman's effort internally in the industry, at the commission to protect the spectrum, as well as reinvesting the profits that are remaining, which are not very much. I'll say one last thing, right, because you raised an interesting point about revenue. 4 years ago, the advertising revenue for radio was about $21 billion. In 2009, most of the reports that I've been getting and tracking, it's closer to 13 billion, folks. 13.3 billion was the last number that I heard. That is a huge swing in a 4-year period. And so you have stations having double-digit declines year over year, quarter by quarter, 20%, 15% year-over-year declines from prior year. And so, yes, the covenants of most of these major groups and small operators have crashed and burned. And so there has to be a major reset, and it takes the financial community as well as the regulatory community and broadcast owners themselves.
So as a follow-on to Zamar's comment, I'm also reminded of another witty quote by Mark Twain on death, and it was actually a slight on my hometown, Cincinnati. He said, when I die, I hope it's in Cincinnati because I won't find out about it for 20 years. And I think that that statement is apt with regard to how small, to follow on Zamara's comment, how small local radio broadcasters sort of lived in Cincinnati when it came to understanding media consumption patterns of individuals. And when you look at the, sort of the emerging technologies of the internet, wireless devices, and all sorts of technology, the thinking, instead of solely focusing on it as competition, there should have been a little more effort in terms of collaboration. And I think that is, if you take a look back in history, I think that is one of the big issues for why you see radio, some of these small and local radio companies struggling now, is that consumers had a major shift in the way they received information, news, entertainment. It was a big shift that there was no sort of requisite variety between how the operators responded to what was going on in the environment. And I think that you touched on that with the sort of the product life cycle matters, and that, I think, is one of the major reasons. And I'll talk a little more as we get down about how we thought about those things, 12 years ago at AOL in terms of looking at how consumers received information.
I just want to say one other thing. I agree with almost everything that everybody said about the radio business up until now. I think that the radio operators got fat and lazy. I think they were lulled into thinking that it was never going to change. It was always going to be the same, even though they saw what happened to the print industry with the advent of the Internet and people, Internet users, being able to get anything that's in print free online. We didn't think that could happen to us. And we were fat, and we were lazy, and we weren't innovative enough. Now I think it's time for us to smell the coffee. The good thing about it is that radio still remains a highly, extremely viable source of music, news, and information. And Frank talked about Hispanic radio stations, because that's the business that I'm in. I can tell you that, it's a good business for us, because we can look at just we're in the eve of the 2010 census, and we believe when the dust clears on that, you're going to see even a greater percentage of Hispanics living in the U.S. mainland, and you're going to see that the marketing power that we have is virtually still untapped. But unfortunately, when budgets are crunched, the first ones to go are black and Hispanic radio stations. That hasn't changed. The first ones to go in an economy is the business that we're in. We're the first ones to feel it. Kind of like that dopey movie that was made, that Austin Powers movie where he claimed he lost his mojo. I think we lost our mojo. We lost the sexiness of what the radio stations are all about. And now we find ourselves backpedaling and counterpunching. And it's a shame, because we're still, as you mentioned before, in well over 90% penetration in all homes. You can't get into a car without putting on the radio. In Hispanic communities, we are still the primary source of news and information and language. So we're not going away anytime soon. We just need to look at the model and say, we got to do it a little bit differently.
So we've heard the contributing factors of variety. We've heard consolidation of the industry. We've heard about the advertising dollars maybe not being aware of some of the sources of advertising revenue, the life cycle, the loss of mojo. There are a variety of contributing factors. Maybe the Telecom Act of @96 should have been a warning bell, a wake-up call that was perhaps missed by a lot of folks. We've laid the foundation. I wanted to ask Jeffrey if there are any differences, because you're dealing with sovereign nations when you talk about Native American radio. What is their status, or have they been affected to the same extent by some of the contributing factors that have already been laid out?
Well, thank you. First, I want to say thank you, Carolyn and Mr. Wade and Mr. Reed, for inviting me to participate. I am here on behalf of Loris Ann Taylor, the executive director of Native Public Media. And unfortunately, record rain and record snowfall in Arizona, northern Arizona, conspired against her ability to be able to be here. I really appreciate your question because to continue with this, I'm pinch hitting for Loris, and I think to continue that analogy, there are some curveballs being thrown around the table to our experience that are a little both difficult to relate to and very recognizable at the same time. When you ask the question about why is it in trouble, in Indian country, we think, when has there been a time when we haven't been in trouble? Native communities, with few exceptions, are cyclically impoverished, remote, economically distressed, low demographic communities that have significant geopolitical challenges, not just sort of terrain challenges when you're talking about deployment of communications. Certainly, Mr. Winston, Mr. Montero, Mr. Jones, we can relate directly to the things that you're talking about in terms of a changing field, changing tectonics, the kind of things that changes at a national level have significant ripple effects in remote America. And certainly, I think one way to try to relate here is something that you sort of led me to, Carolyn. Native broadcasters they're community broadcasters. Native Public Media is a project of the National Federation of Community Broadcasters, and there is a significant reason for that. There are very few commercial stations with all that have been said about the challenges of the economies in Indian country. The 34 stations that are members of Native Public Media are all community licenses, and they are institutions of tribal governments, of tribal communities, of native nations. They are anchor institutions. And yes, there are challenges, there are troubles, but when it comes to terrestrial radio on tribal lands, there is a bright future. Maybe it's as simple as it's good to be the only game in town when there are a few games in town. But in the, I said there are 34 existing stations. When the commission opened its FM non-commercial educational license window in 2007, there were about 50 applications from tribal nations, doubling the network potentially in Indian country, and many of those construction permits have already been granted. We certainly have the same challenges in terms of something that Frank said in terms of the accounts receivable deadlines. They're certainly getting longer in whether your revenue is ad revenue or whether it comes from a community. But it's a time, I think, when with some of these commonalities, it's just so I want to reach out to my colleagues here and say, welcome to Indian country. Welcome to the challenges of getting assets to be able to to develop an economy. That having been said, native broadcasters also, I will continue in the time we have to try to relate directly to what's our discussion here, because these are institutions of governments. These are institutions that have become, we cannot have a step backward. We can't afford a step backward. In an environment where we have 5 to 8% broadband penetration rate, it will be our terrestrial radio stations that will help be the drivers of that new technology, new media 2.0. So some of these problems, it would have been wonderful to have been ahead of, but others, I think there's some commonality here that it's being experienced by the native nations and their broadcasters as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to welcome Muriel Armstrong. He's made it through the traffic hurdles, and we are welcome. We are just, as a reminder, he's both a radio and TV host, a founder of a number of organizations, and very keenly interested and aware of technology, where we're headed, where we are and where we're headed. Co-founder of Tech, a social networking utility, Tech Boom. I just like saying that. So welcome. We were just laying the foundation, talking about the current status, and I think we've thrown out a lot of the contributing factors that has led to the current state of radio. But, you know, the purpose of this session is just not to talk about the problems. There are many. We want to recognize, and I think a few of you also touched on the fact, even with all of the odds, radio is still here. So we're moving on to the segment of questions to talk about how radio still rises even today. I think some key examples just from recent times is the current national initiative for the Census 2010. You know, I hear PSAs, I think there probably could be more of them in terms of their ad revenue for that initiative, but who else can reach the local community, those folks who would otherwise not participate at all, except local radio. I've heard PSAs, I've heard rap songs, etc. There's nobody who could do that for us but us. And another example taken from the recent tragedy in Haiti, where there's a small radio station in New York, Radio Soleil. I'd never heard of Radio Soleil. They were the only radio station, or one of the only radio stations, broadcasting throughout the earthquake and thereafter. And I understand people were lined up around the block trying to get in to get information about their loved ones in Haiti. So those are just two examples of the many, many examples of why radio must continue, why it's still relevant. I think we want to explore how can radio capitalize on some of its unique abilities and make the case that, you know, they merit investment. Maybe they need to talk about innovative business models or strategies, but radio has something unique to offer. How can that case be strongly made?
I'll speak up because our company is a beneficiary of the Census 2010. We are placing the local spot radio and TV as a subcontractor to Global Hue. And one of the benefits of the limited dollars that are being spent in minority radio, we're doing the black outreach, which includes African American, Caribbean, and Haitian communities, is the ability to cross-promote on a local level. So you have your broadcast, you know, whatever your spots, PSAs or whatever, and your interviews, but then you have the local remotes so that you can press even deeper into those communities with local remotes, you know, promotions being done. And so that just creates a whole nother level of synergy of education that is going, and motivation that will come out of those kinds of campaigns. So that's what radio offers. See, so you're doing what we call grassroots as well as treetop outreach with the kind of, which is the kind of campaigning that you'll need to get people motivated to fill out their census forms. So that's a prime example.
Is there a weight or a value when you go in for financing given to that aspect of local radio?
Not really.
No.
And if anyone knows of someone that's out there,
I mean, there's Goodwill.
I'll leave my card.
There's Goodwill.
Well, can I just say something? The census brings about a kind of special set of circumstances, and I'm going to explain it to you why. Because as the person who fronts SBS radio stations across the country, I met with Global Hue. I met with Daisy Esposito, which is the Spanish end of the advertising agency that's responsible for placing some of the local dollars in our markets. And I said to them, I said, I am going to do something over and above. Okay? Why? Because I think it is incredibly important for us to get the right read on this. So I think it's critically important for us to make sure that our listeners are opening the doors for the census takers. Right. Because as you know, there's so many of us come from so many different countries, they don't trust the government. Okay, so we have a problem with that. And that becomes our problem because if you've got undocumented individuals, by the way, who are still buying product and services, who are still spending a crap load of money in the economy, but you know what? You're not getting credit for it. We're not getting credit for it. So the marketplace is at a loss there. So I've met with them and said that we will go over and above what we would do for any client. But the proviso is don't expect this for, don't expect this for your car companies or McDonald's or so on and so forth. Don't come back and tell me, well, you did this campaign for this one, you could do. No, because this is different. It is our chance to really make a difference. And if we can make a difference demographically to show truly what our audience is all about, truly how big it is, you know what, that can only mean more money to the marketplace.
Yeah. Like I said, just, I agree. Well, on the census point, it is commonly, and Frank, you tell me if you agree with this, but it is commonly believed that the 1990 census was a watershed moment for investment into the Hispanic market, especially the media market. Because in the 80s, when nobody really paid attention to Hispanic media, Univision was a small, sleepy company being run by Hallmark. And suddenly when the 1990 census came out, it was the first time that it was predicted that by the turn of the century, the Hispanic market would be the largest ethnic majority in the country, ethnic minority in the country. And it's not a coincidence that the amount of capital that started flowing into Hispanic media in the early 90s, in the wake of the 90s census, shot up dramatically. I mean, that's, it just boom. SBS IPO, Univision IPO, Heftel, within Heftel Broadcasting IPO. I mean, boom, it went, radio, it just exploded during that period. Now, having said that, will the upcoming census drive a dramatic change in investment in Hispanic media or African American media? I don't know. But where you could see it? Keep your eye on South Asian media. You're seeing real fast growth. Well, some of the as radio stations are going to in-band on channel digital, terrestrial digital. You're seeing some of those digital channels. They're being brokered by Pakistani formats, Indian formats, East Asian formats. In New York City, you're seeing a real big growth in Russian formats. Mm-hmm. And if the census were to show dramatic increases in those demographics, then yeah, you could certainly see a situation where the census drives interest and investment in markets that perhaps the investment community didn't have their eye on, just like they didn't really have their eye on the Hispanic community in the 80s.
Carolyn, I think one of the strengths of minority radio, regardless of which sector of the minority community we're talking about, is that it is largely cultural. We're talking about cultural programming, cultural broadcasting. That is certainly one of the strengths of native radio, is that it is it's cultural preservation, it's cultural exercise. The 565 tribal nations, native nations in the United States, each one has its own unique history and language and tradition, and the 34 stations, the 34 nations that have stations, it's not just an exercise looking backwards, but it's an exercise looking forwards, taking these new technological mediums and utilizing them in a way to create new cultural practices, new cultural experience. We have to, in advocating for ourselves, in this place and in other places where we're looking to collateralize our assets, that is one of our greatest assets, is that we speak with an authentic voice to our communities. That is not to be underestimated.
Well, I'm very curious about this, and this is fascinating to hear the dialogue around Census, obviously, which is a commerce effort that we're engaged in right now. But but I'm also interested in, perhaps Mario can contribute here. Is there anything generational that we can learn from in terms of the use of online strategies, et cetera? During the previous presidential campaign, I think we learned a lot. And having been a part of a number of those conversations on how we use online strategies, how we engage Generation Xers and others, and how does that add value to in our efforts to sustain radio as a business? And have we made that transition and shift to what, quite frankly, is something we can't avoid? And I'm curious about your thoughts in that regard.
Well, first off, thank you so much for having me here today and contributing to this awesome panel of bringing in intellect power that you have here. As it relates to your point, you're absolutely right. We're seeing, when I go out and speak to the youth of today about technology, and this is across the country, and in some places, Europe or Switzerland and Korea. And just to give you a sense of what's going on,
our online stream is made possible by Acme Paper.
I'm pulling up a stream right now, live from a radio station, right from my iPhone. Now, this is an iPhone application, and it's actually going to go into the actual programming that's on the air right now in just a second here. But my point is, these are the devices that the generation are carrying. These devices and others. And what we are seeing is that by 2013, really the access to the internet is going to be dominated by these handheld devices, not by desktop computers. So that means we have an opportunity because we can access the content anytime, let me stop. We can access the content anytime, anywhere. So that opens up a whole other opportunity that I think has really been overlooked for quite some time. And it's time that we really pay attention to where people what tools people are utilizing and where they're utilizing these tools to get access to the content that they're looking for. So one thing that I'm not really seeing, because many of the youth today are looking for these types of programs that could be more geared towards them on these devices that offer them all types of opportunities to share the content, to move it from one place to another, to be able to save it and listen to it later, to favorite it and share it to a friend. All types of transactions can take place on these devices when you are acquiring the content. But what I'm not really seeing, or to a large degree, is the mobile application development of a lot of local and minority-owned radio stations. In other words, developing applications for these mobile devices. There's no reason, that is a total revenue stream opportunity, number one. Number two, it's an empowering marketing vehicle for how you can reach these audiences, number two. So you take those two combinations. Number three, the analytics that you can derive from what people actually do on these devices, what they're clicking on, how long are they on it, what calls to action do they engage with. All of these things are very, very powerful analytics that I would throw up against PPM any day to challenge whether those analytics can provide better than what Arbitron and others are putting out there. So when you see these statistics that I'm not making up, when you clearly see more and more people carrying these devices, when I hear from people that are telling me they're listening to a program from their favorite station back in Baltimore, but they now live in California, that's incredible, so that they can actually still remain in tune to what's happening locally to the areas that they care about the most. So I think the internet obviously is really what is the groundwork, and broadband connectivity and adoption is clearly the issue that we need to get to. But one of the things that we've noticed, if you look at Pew Internet Research and others, Hispanics and African Americans actually consume more media on handheld devices than any other ethnicity.
No doubt.
So that is an amazing statistic that we cannot ignore, and I'm really kind of frankly tired of us being consumers of it and not creators of it. And I think the opportunity now is for us to really look at creation to benefit. I think of I Am For Radio and others that are in that space, and I want to see mobile development in that space next.
Just to follow up on what Mario said, here's sort of a specific example of how, when you look at, again, the changing media consumption patterns and its impact on radio, if you think about the way, one of the things that the Internet allows is it allows people to get information and entertainment in the long tail, okay? So you can get to a level of granularity with respect to entertainment, news, that's impossible via the radio or television broadcast or any other, just because you don't have the capacity. So, for example, it's one thing to say, I like karate. It's another thing to say, I want to watch Muay Thai, Taekwondo, Tang Sudo, right? So the Internet allows people to really target very, very pointed areas. Now, an opportunity exists for radio. Radio is going to always remain relevant, in particular to local content, and that's an important piece. What radio operators can do is drive some of this more granular content onto their broadband platforms, their mobile application, if they develop those, which could be done, or their websites. That's just one simple example, and you see that now with WTOP will say, if you want to hear more about this news, go to our website. And on their online presence or their new media platforms, they're empowered to just dig down deeper and more specific to where the consumers actually want to get information. That's why Twitter and Facebook and these other social networking platforms, again, they get people very sort of granular information that you can't get through mass media programming.
I also think that we're closer to it than other media have been in terms of closer to looking at these things as opportunities. In today's New York Times, they were talking about the Apple tablet. And in the lead article, it says, Apple tablet, print media hope for a payday. Okay? Now, print media, you want to talk about an industry that's taken it in the shorts in the last few years. Print media has really been almost laid to rest. Now, they're hoping that this new device, okay, which Apple's going to be pitching the living crap out of it, is going to be another entree into them to get to that missing audience that they lost, okay, by being able to charge for content. And what Eric says, we're still local content providers. We need to bridge that gap between what's happening, especially in the younger generation. See, the younger generation doesn't look at radio as a viable tool. They kind of like think about it. They might listen to it, but they'll never admit they're listening to it. There was another article last week.
It's not cool
anymore. It is not cool. It is not cool. There was an article last week, I think it was in the Times again, and they were talking about the Kaiser Foundation study, and they were talking about, they did a study from 8 to 18-year-olds, okay, and some incredible things were talked about in this study. 76% of 8 to 18-year-olds have an iPod or an MP3 that they listen to about 2.5 hours a day. Now, the reason why I'm saying this is when they were talking about how electronically connected they are to all of these different devices to get music, information, what have you, radio wasn't mentioned in this article at all. Radio was not mentioned once, and I went over it 4 or 5 different times. Now I find out when you get into a little bit more that at the 2.5 hours of music listening that they're listening to, 32 minutes is radio. Right. Now that was buried someplace, but it wasn't in the original article. And it kind of is a commentary on where we're at. We're just not there. Especially that the 8 to 12-year-old, the 8 to 15-year-old, and we got to get back there.
And isn't this where, Frank, you touched...
There's definitely a perception problem for radio, and it's funny because I think some of the perception you're seeing that the it's not cool to listen to radio that you hear on the part of teenagers and preteens is very much like what you're hearing from banks and hedge funds and investment companies. They're kind of in lockstep. It's not cool. Radio's not cool anymore. But yeah, but the funny thing is, and this came up actually. I was last year. I was both at the BIA Financial and the Kagan Forecast or BIA Forecast Conference, and and I did sort of an informal little poll with my daughters. I've got a 14-year-old and I've got an 11-year-old, so they're right in the sweet spot. And I noticed that when they're sitting in my car, the first thing they say is, "Dad, get that old fogey music off. I want to hear, in the case of my 14, I want to hear Hot 99.5." So I'm sitting there and I'm thinking to myself, this is the same 14-year-old who says that radio is really not cool, but yet she knows the frequency. She knows the frequency. Okay? She knows the format. And then when I talked to her a little later and she's listening to the songs on her iPod, I just went up to her, I said, "Anita, I'm just kind of curious. When you download a song off of the iPod, how do you know which song to download? I mean, which ones do you get?" And she goes, "How do you find out about it?" She goes, "Well, a couple of ways. So, stuff my friends listen to, but mostly it's, I hear it on the radio." I'm like, okay,
Well, there's
interesting.
got to be something
But
cool.
here's the thing. Unless she's sitting in the car and she's not driving yet,
Yeah.
she's not listening to radio.
She's not listening.
So your point to having the application so that this content can get to the devices that they are plugged into is critically important.
What about, I want to just follow up that point with about the coolness. What is more cool than listening to radio over the internet? What is more cool than I Am for Radio?
What's actually, I Am for Radio Broadcasting Network is a direct result of what Mario was talking about. They're youth that the problem is content. They want more content. They're tired of the same 5 songs. Most people are tired of the same 5 songs every 19 minutes.
Right.
That's the problem. So people are looking for something different. This broadcast, and I'm fairly new to the industry. I've been on the radio for 10 years. I Am for Radio was created 7 years ago out of the need that people wanted different content. We're totally online. We're not an FM station. We're not a terrestrial station at all. We're not a satellite station. We're online. And just like Mario said, you can access online. There was a teenager actually who created the F-Stream app for the iPhones so people can actually tune in and listen through their phones. So that's where it is. That's where we are. We're actually working with the Census to reach people through their phones, because unlike a radio, you go everywhere with your phone, to the bathroom with your phone. Your phone is everywhere with you, and that's where we are right now. So we have to meet people where they are, and that's the phone.
Well, I want to, these are excellent points, but I want to make sure that we don't get caught up in the moment and forget the lesson that we didn't get the last time. Radio is constantly being talked about as a technology, and there is technology built into the business, but it is not the technology. And this is one of the distinctions, I think, that has allowed us to miss opportunity. Radio has always been a human condition. It's always been about the people behind the microphone and not just the microphone. So the earlier question was, what's unique about radio and urban and Hispanic radio? The credibility of radio has much less to do with the music that's being played. It has everything to do with the personality behind that microphone. They have developed a trust with the community. That's why it works. That trust is transformative, and it can be reemployed into any platform and extended into any platform. And that's one of the unique powers that we still have as an opportunity. When one of Frank's personalities gets on the air and says something, anything that goes on right after or just before what he says or she says is much more powerful to that audience than it is when it's just sent out electronically on a platform. We are right now as a country enamored by technology. We're drunk with it. And so it causes us to miss the deeper value and deeper truth. Radio started out, when we started out as a medium in the 20s, it was really about the personalities. And it continued that way. We're really a human search engine, if you think about it. If you think about the power of what our medium is, There are hundreds of thousands of records out there, and some personality, some programmer decides these 40 will be a hit, and they end up being a hit. Well, what's up with that? I mean, what happens is it's the credibility of the humans behind it that and their brand presence that makes radio unique, makes it super local. And that's what we can export to other media. And so, yes, I believe what Mario is saying is absolutely true. It's, for example, the African-American audience, over 56% of them are under the age of 35. And 30% are under the age of 18. And they have long since gone away from the old transistor to the new transistor that Mario just showed us. That is the transistor radio of today and tomorrow. And this coming year, there'll be $560 million spent just in mobile advertising, and that's going to grow exponentially.
May I ask, and I know we're going to take a break in just a few minutes, but from a pure business model, and if we're talking about how do we sustain radio stations as we move today and in the future, isn't this type of hybrid operation online paired with current traditional radio, is that where the investors want you to go? The advertising dollars are currently, I mean, so from a business, and I think you talked about this earlier, I mean, isn't this shift absolutely necessary?
If you
are to sustain yourselves financially from a purely business model, isn't that what advertising and other investors?
Rick, if you're talking to a captive audience, which I really do believe that urban and Hispanic broadcasters are talking to, it is imperative that you embrace the new technology, you bundle it up, you find some great synergistic connections to it, and then you sell it back to them. Because you're selling back to a marketer, an advertiser, that knows little about your audience, because they're looking at you as the expert in that. So why not do all of that? That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to bundle up TV, radio, internet, bring it all to an advertiser and say, you want entree into this marketplace which you don't understand, and you don't speak their language, and you don't understand the culture, you don't need to. We're going to be the bridge to that, and we're going to show you how to do it. And we're going to do this cross-platform kind of service for you so that you can really appreciate the dynamics of that marketplace and get everything that you need to get out of it. Yeah, so you need to go that way.
And go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, can I throw out a question? Because obviously this is a trend that's been developing over several years. And we discuss this at NABOB conferences quite frequently. And what I hear from my members, because we bring in experts to talk about internet platforms for radio, and what I hear from my members again and again is that the revenues are not tracking the needed investment. So the problem you have is that when you start investing in higher technology activities for your radio station, you can't justify it on a revenue basis. And as I was interested in hearing from Frank and Zamira, who've been on the front lines there, that a large part of the reluctance of radio to embrace these new technologies is not because they don't see them developing and don't understand that they are there, but the problem is they can't convert that into revenue sufficient to cover those new investments and those ongoing operating costs of having skilled people on staff to operate these higher tech functions. So I'd like to get some response from the guys on the front line about that.
Just let me say, we are being streamed, and one of the questions coming across was who's going to pay for the investment?
You know, sorry, go ahead. Well, I to answer your question from the native perspective, if we don't, nobody else will. And that goes to the point of your, who's going to pay for it. We are not drunk with technology in Indian country. And the 1990 census was a watershed moment for Indian country, but because it demonstrated such an extreme need for communications. It illustrated less than a 50% telephone penetration rate in Indian country. That rose to less than 70%, just under 70% in the 2000 decennial census. And we have a broadband penetration rate to run the kind of applications and mobile devices we're talking about, that's estimated around 5 to 8%. That comes from discussions among tribal leaders from across the United States. So we have an environment where we're trying to build and sustain these minority radio stations that are still, these native radio stations that are still very relevant because they are one of the few games in town. They do increasingly play a public safety and a homeland security type of role as well. But trying to engage a new generation that is most definitely adaptive. We're some of the most highly adaptive societies in the history of the world in Indian country. We have always used the best of what we've learned from our neighbors and others. And that certainly includes modern technologies and communications technologies. It is also still an environment that is so strong culturally that it is a place where word of mouth can still be very reliable, where the mother network is still someplace where you can really learn what's going on. And we have to find ways. I agree with Mr. Pierce when he says it's all about individualism. It's about the ability to find and make what is otherwise being broadcast, being chosen for you, making it relevant to yourselves. On tribal lands, in order to be able to do that, we have to integrate, have to find business models that are sustainable. And in Indian country, sustainable does not always mean profitable. That is why so many tribal governments themselves have become their own carriers of last resort, their own providers, their own broadcasters. Nobody else will do it for them. There's another significant reason why we have to engage with new platforms, internet-based platforms, is that reservations and tribal lands have not always been the easiest place to live, the best place to find a job, the best place to educate children or raise your family. And we have significant urban and suburban native populations. And just as Mr. Armstrong was saying, how do I stay in touch with my people back in Baltimore? Well, it's the same exact question for tribal people. How do we stay back in touch with folks that are at Rocky Boy or out on Navajo or where my family is from in Oklahoma and Nebraska? I look forward to the time where we're going to talk about business models, because we've done some studies. Native Public Media and New America Foundation has done a study that has proven some fundamental truths that apply in this environment, but I'll wait until that time.
Well, I'd like to get any more thoughts on who's going to pay, and then we're going to take a break.
You want to take it first? Or?
Yeah. The growth is what the investors are looking for. They want to be sure that they can get 3 times plus out of it, whether they're a debt or whether they're an equity player. And radio hasn't been able to, in the current model, demonstrate that. Radio has obviously been going the other direction. But there's a reset opportunity. And embedded in the noise, one of the things that we're seeing is that we've gone in the 70s from, I would say, broadcasting to target marketing to niche marketing to one-to-one marketing to now it's nano marketing. And there was a new MIT study that just came out that was saying how this nano marketing and advertising is starting to show diminishing returns on profitability to advertisers. It's already starting that we have gotten so minute in our targeting that the ROI is not as lucrative as it was just 18 months ago. And we also see, I think, a big truth coming in that says hope for radio, and that's in Twitter. See, we all can get information on the internet ourselves. Just about anything we want, we can find ourselves. We don't need anyone else anymore, thanks to Google and others. But Twitter, if I want to follow you, Rick, there are thousands of people that would like to follow you, and do what you say just because you put it out there. Because credibility is much more important than just access to information, and that's why radio has always had a real power. And so using technology to export that, not only in traditional over-the-air, but combine that with new technology online, like Mario was talking about, is a great combination. And that tension is coming back. That's why you're seeing people following people and not just going out using technology for information, and using that to monetize and switching to new models that I'm sure we'll talk about, it will give radio an opportunity for a renaissance.
I think we've come around full circle. You know, we started us by talking about the problems that minority and local radio stations have, and we talked about the tough economy. We talked about the rating services and how they've affected us and so on and so forth. Now we get down to the nitty-gritty in terms of how do we expand our business, how do we stay viable in the face of all of this new technology. And I'm not from the South, unless you call the South Bronx the South. But they have a saying that says it's hard to think about draining the swamp when you're up to your ass in alligators. You know, so most of us are up to our ass in alligators. So we're trying to see what it is that we could do to survive year to year while still trying to expand our business, while still trying to say, hey, we want to be viable and profitable in the year 2015. So how do we get there? Because right now, at this present course, radio, the way the old model was, isn't going to work.
I think what has to happen is that people really have to pay attention to, like Mr. Winston said, you know, what's out there. You know, who's doing this new style of radio. People, the gatekeepers, the powers that be, have to listen to new ideas. You have a broadcasting network. You have individuals such as Muriel that's working with youth. They know exactly what's going on. We have our finger on the pulse. This station has been around for 7 years, and like I said, we don't do any terrestrial streaming. We're totally online. We have 106,000 listeners on a budget of less than $10,000 per month for 6 years. It's time for people to pay attention to what's already here. It's here. It's here. We're doing it. Mario's doing it. People have to pay attention.
I'd like to piggyback off of what Cleveland is saying because, and just so it's clear, you know, I live in so many different areas of content generation. So just to give you a quick understanding, I'm weekly on CNN delivering content for them. I'm on satellite radio delivering content for them. I'm on NPR public radio, which is not commercial radio as we know. Then I'm on KYS with Russ Parler. I'm on Tom Joyner. Then we're on the internet. And then I'm doing podcasting. So my point with all this is saying is that I get to really see so many different models and so many different uses and adoption and techniques that it's really interesting that I can't foresee how radio can survive if it does not go to a hybrid model. And when you ask the question, who needs to pay, there's a lot of confusion. You just heard some stats and figures from someone that's doing it. There's a lot of confusion and misperception as to what it costs to make these types of things take place. And I think we get so focused on how much money is it going to take, and it's like, well, are you focused? I understand the issue that we need to generate revenue, but at what point do you reinvest in yourself to say we need to change? If no one else is going to do it for us, we can't, you know, and there are grant opportunities that these stations don't go after because they haven't really looked at that particular model. But when you look at that, I cannot foresee why, when the cost of entry is really, in practicality, so low to get engaged. The answers that you hear back from people, we don't have the staff, we don't have the, and I get that, and I've met with some of those folks and I understand it, but have they really, really researched what it takes to pull it off? And are we talking about a whole overhaul, or are we talking about a phased approach? Are we willing to experiment with our medium to find new ways to develop new programming? We heard personalities, we've heard that drive content, we've heard local, we've heard focus. All of those things, we're seeing more rock stars on the internet today than some of the multi-million-dollar people that we are paying for these radio shows. And why is that? Because of some of the things that Samara just pointed out. People want to follow people that have great content, not necessarily personality-driven stuff anymore. I mean, obviously personality works well and you need that for entertainment purposes to some extent, but the content trumps that and rises above all that. People will listen to a more horrible podcast before they listen to a well-invested radio show that they do not like. And that's just the reality. I have people that are taking devices and bypassing the radio in the car. They're bypassing radio. They don't even think, iPod, boom, bypassed.
Well, on that note, Murray. I think you set us up to take a little break. We can think about how we can get folks back on the track and not bypassing radio in our next segment. Let's take about a 10-minute break. So we'll reconvene at 10 after. Is that fine with everyone? Okay, great. Okay, I think we're going to start again. Hello, if everyone could take their seats. Is this on? We're starting again.
Everybody take their seats, please.
We got some challenges. As a matter of fact,
We're just starting.
so he's supposed to get some stuff at 6 and we'll check it first. I'm on it.
We have some questions that we wanted to, on this one, I think. Okay. Okay, welcome back, everyone. So we've laid the foundation, we've talked about what works, what doesn't work, and now we're on the precipice of the future, which the future is now. In the entertainment world, we've heard about so-called collabos. Artists will team with other artists to extend their reach into a new demographic, to expand their sales, et cetera, et cetera. It works for them. So this is a concept that we think that others in the media should think about. And we've talked about it generally when we've talked about hybrids between traditional radio and some of the new platforms and new technology. I just want to kick it off, this part of our session, with, are there examples of broadband use today? What are radio stations doing today to engage new technologies or new platforms? What examples are out there? I know it's not a hybrid, but certainly we have the example of just a purely streamed network, and maybe you can, Cleveland, you can talk about your formatting. I mean, what's a typical programming session or programming day for IM4 Radio?
Typical program is very different from what you normally would see on regular radio. We kind of run off a TV schedule. Our on-air personalities are not on the air every day, 4 hours a day, which enables us to be able to provide fresher content. People pay attention a little bit more with our on-air personalities. We have about 34 right now out of our Largo location. So with that content, I mean, and that can be from everything from soul music to talk to rock, everything, we pretty much play it. And that's what people are paying attention to.
Muriel, what are you seeing that's happening today?
Well, beyond what I've already mentioned earlier.
Well, you can reiterate all of that. That's you have some radio stations who are engaged in using some other platforms.
Yeah, absolutely. You have radio stations using more and more different platforms. But what I'm seeing, and I mentioned this earlier, and I think this is definitely a solution as something that we should start to focus on, and that is the mobile development of our content. And what I mean by that is either making our websites mobile or making applications, native applications. There's a difference between the mobile web and making your website accessible on a mobile device, and a clear difference in creating an app that has a set of features and functionality that runs on these types of mobile devices. And I think as you know, we pointed out earlier, ad spending is increasing in the mobile space, and Myra pointed out some specific figures. And I've spoken with some of the companies that actually do advertising on, or help actually companies advertise their brand on mobile devices. And that is clearly growing. And if you even look at the recent events, albeit as disastrous of the event that it was with Haiti, you saw a empowerment of people using their mobile devices to get engaged. And why I'm saying that is because that's also setting the stage for micropayments. It's also setting the stage for people being comfortable using their phones to make financial transactions, whether that be consuming content or donations. So I think we're at that tipping point, and we need to take advantage of the fact that our audiences, Native American, Hispanic, Latino, and African American, are using these devices more so than others on the mobile web, and capitalize on the adoption of us as content providers leveraging these tools. So I think from that perspective, I'm seeing specific examples like NPR, which has a iPhone application that is a specific app that they've created. But then I've seen smaller stations like WTMD in the Baltimore market actually create its own iPhone application, and we're talking probably about $4,000 to $5,000 for this particular iPhone app, just because I know we want some hard figures and ideas. Obviously, these things can go to $20,000 or $30,000 depending on the functionality and what we're looking for. But you can get into the game of mobile streaming and mobile content providing for under or around $5K.
Can I ask a question? As I expected, I was going to learn a lot here. Mario, when you say create an app, I assumed when you said that somebody had created an app for the iPhone, it's one of these situations where you go to the iPhone store and you just download that app.
Correct.
Why would each station need to create its own app?
Well, I don't.
I thought you were saying that there was an app that you can go to the Apple store and get, and then your station could access that app and be accessible to the world.
No, what I'm saying is that each station should create its own defined application. Unless you have an ownership group, then it makes sense for the ownership group to look at creating one application where you can access all the different stations that it owns.
Okay.
Jim,
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, Jim, you can think about the app as like a low-power television station. It's just it's solely targeted to your programming. And so, yeah, it would be an app. And I concur. The mobile app that we built for the product that my company is launching later this quarter, we spent about $50,000, and that's a complex technology where we're close to seven figures for the web-based application. But for the mobile, we spent about $50,000, and it's very complex. It's actually going to show how everyone in the world is connected. Right. So whether you are in our system or not, it just maps it out. So you and I meet, and we punch in each other's names. That application, as complicated as it is, although it piggybacks, it's an API to our more expensive web-based application, still was a $50,000 app.
API is an application programming interface.
Yeah. Thanks, Mario. Sorry, Mario.
It's just a snippet. At the end of the day, it's a snippet of code that you place onto your application.
You can tell the professionals here.
No. I just wanted to make sure it was clear. I thought your point was well raised. I just want to make sure.
I've heard, Eric and Mario here. I've heard several stations or station groups within a particular market looking to create their own sort of micro social networking site within the given market, where people sign up. I mean, many stations, as you know already, will frequently have Facebook groups or Twitter feeds, either from the station or the part of their on-air personalities, but they're creating social network sites that may be unique to, say, San Antonio or someplace like that, and we'll have feeds of activities of interest within that given community, tying into the station, maybe having a live feed from the station, but they also tie into their advertisers, and not just banners or links to the advertisers' websites, which, Mario, as you point out, is great immediate feedback to those advertisers of who is who's coming to their site and how they're getting there, because they're getting there from the social networking site. But they're also using it as a vehicle to be able to print or download anything from coupons for those advertisers, concert ticket giveaways, be the fourth caller. You don't go to the station anymore. You go to the social. If you're the fourth caller, you just download the tickets right from the social networking site, and you may have to be able to have subscribed to the social networking site, because some of those activities are only available to those who are participating in the social networking site, which pulls them in even that much more. And then taking that social networking site, creating an app so that you can download it onto your iPhone, your PDA, and be able to and be able to access it or download podcasts with the audio off of your PDA.
Does that make a case for some of the big ISPs like Comcast or Verizon, or even the big search engines like Google, Bing, Yahoo, to make an investment in this sort of collaborations? Is that part of a case to be made for investment from?
It's a case to be made if they want to make some money.
Well, I mean, is there a business incentive for them?
I mean, that's what I mean. It's a case to be made because of, if you look at how, the lack of broadband adoption is in this country, and there's a bunch of other things that need to be dealt with, and I know that we already have an FCC plan. In fact, this February, we'll be hearing more about that national broadband plan, right?
Or thereabouts, yeah.
What's that? What was that?
Yes.
But I'll keep my comment really short and brief on this. But the point is, absolutely, because you have areas of the country that they can say what they want, but the providers have not decided to go into certain areas because of certain types of infrastructure that's not available or that needs to be built out, and there's a significant cost to doing that construction, and I get all that. And when you only have a certain amount of houses or a certain amount or a certain population that they don't really foresee possibly as a money-generating revenue scenario, they call it redlining. I'm not suggesting anyone's doing that, but it's just weird to me that we don't have full broadband adoption across the country accessible. Now, what that does bring into play, though, is something that we need to look at as a solution, is forget the wired. Where are we thinking about wireless? For example, 4G or WiMAX technologies, or evolutions of even what you hear a lot about 3G technologies. When I was just at CES 2 years ago, and so this is actually in just this last year, but the one thing I want to share with you is internet in the vehicle will be here, is here to some degree, but will be here in the mainstream very shortly. It's already, the pieces of the puzzle are there. Once you have something like WiMAX, and for those that do not know, that is like a 30-mile wide radius of a Wi-Fi hotspot. So imagine being able to drive around your city and have that type of connectivity without dropping that connectivity. You could not be tuning into frequencies. You could be tuning into internet addresses on the dial in the vehicle coming.
And just to add on with that, I'm sorry, that's happening right now. We got a lot of young people that are figuring out a lot of things at our station. And what we're actually doing is it's a little mechanism that we have right here. You're probably familiar with it. This is plugging into a phone. And this is plugging, some cars have auxiliary jacks right now in their cars. So people are able to actually listen in their cars through a simple auxiliary jack plugged into their phone, into the car. So our station, other stations are able to be listened to right now, just from something that simple.
Carol, the point that you left off with before we took our break, that question was never really dealt with. You said, who's going to pay for it? Mm-hmm. And so in listening to what Mario said with regards to the Googles, the Yahoos, and the implications of broadband as they enter into these communities, and that whole idea of redlining that you kind of threw out there, where is the value in the investment? So when you look at e-commerce, when you look at the numbers that are always being thrown out with regards to minority populations and our spend and all of that, why wouldn't the Googles and the Verizons and et cetera want to make those investments? Also, Mario just threw it out there so quickly, but you said there are grants that are available. And not to beat up on our government again, but there's a woman, Linda Smith, I'm going to quote her, and she says, from the book, Who Moved My Cheese? The new cheese is government cheese, and it's green now. There is money available, and the problem is that we don't know how to access those grants, get that information, so that so that the station owners can take advantage of perhaps money that the federal government makes available. But if a case can be built for those investors, or whether it's the federal government or whatever, for e-commerce, for as good corporate citizens, for the educational aspects of broadband, et cetera, it seems to me that the investment opportunity should be there for those who are, brilliant enough to put those packages together to include those elements. It would seem to me.
The business model is, the business opportunity rather, is to the the ability to reach a majority of Americans that are not served by mainstream media in the Native American context. We have in many places, tribal nations are local drivers of economies because of their unique status and the unique types of businesses that they can engage in, and the fact that they make good local partners for economic drivers. I'm sort of the opinion, I agree with what Mario and what Cleveland have said. I think that there's going to be a point in time, or where they've led us in this discussion, there's going to be a point in time where this amazing explosion of technology is going to come back around full circle to where people are looking for what is the good content, what is the actual content, what is the authentic content. I'm a reluctant early adopter, personally.
Okay.
I tend to fall in love with devices. I'm very envious with what's going on over here on the table as well. But when I find something that works, I'm constantly looking for who's reporting on this the best, who's telling me the best story, who's actually digging into this and getting the information to me, and that goes from personal, all sorts of different news sources that come into my household. It is also an environment in Indian country, because of a lack of basic services. It's the ability of these companies, and some of which you mentioned, to get in on the ground floor in the creation of the backbone of a network that will be a new economic driver for rural America. And there's precedent. I wanted to bring the group's attention to a study that I mentioned earlier. This is the first ever study on broadband in Indian country. It was undertaken by Native Public Media and the New America Foundation. It's entitled New Media, Technology, and Internet Use in Indian Country, Quantitative and Qualitative Analyses. And the discussion at this point, we've sort of led up to, what's the value proposition? What's the business model going to look like if we're using terrestrial radio as the backbone, branching off into new media platforms, and what role do the big majority firms, these big search engine firms or others, play in this? One of the fundamental truths of tribal lands is a real lesson in demand aggregation for broadband use. And the other thing that we're never going to succeed in a national census is sheer numbers. We have a very low population base in remote America. So for any communication service to survive, to even approach profitability, as we were talking about earlier, it has to aggregate demand. And Native Public Media and New America Foundation, their study here, lays out in many places in Indian country where that demand aggregation has begun with anchor institutions. The anchor institutions that are unique to our sort of insular communities are our governments, our educational institutions, our health and safety welfare institutions. And in many places, those radio stations are regarded as one of those institutions in nation building and trying to bring together the demand for a critical infrastructure. In certain places, and there's a very good example of what you're talking about, Mario, the creation of an app or a new platform. The Coeur d'Alene tribe in northern Idaho is a very good example of how certain federal programs have been utilized, aggregating demand, building off of a community technology center, now growing into a residential-based service that has a media component to it. They launched a couple of years ago. They launched basically a native YouTube called ResCast, and that's res as in reservation, not resolution. But it is a very good example of the type of authentic, true content programming that will be relevant. And one of the things that's fascinating about Indian country is that it is fascinating. Anytime somebody makes a movie or does a report or program, Dances with Wolves, off the chart in terms of people who attended, wanted to learn more about it. We've got a culture that is entirely engageable by these new technological mediums.
That's really, when you talk about the new technology and how it's being incorporated, we want to make sure that if there are things that the government can be doing to advance or to eliminate or reduce if there's a market entry barrier. For instance, someone has suggested that the copyright laws may act as a barrier and radio stations have to pay. The costs are too cumbersome, or there are laws that restrict how they can use how they can stream content, how they can use content. So I'd like to just step back for a moment to see if there are any institutional or regulatory, statutory barriers there that the government could look at as a way of advancing and opening new markets. So can someone address?
Yeah, if I could, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think, you know, a major problem for adaptation of the internet as an alternate means to deliver content, real-time content over the internet, has been the copyright laws, and you know, a lot as Jim pointed out, you know, who's going to pay for it? I mean, it's not just paying out the sort of the infrastructure needed for the delivery, but it's also paying these additional copyright royalty fees. And where you saw this, in fact, you know, just kind of stepping aside here, many of you know in the past year there was a proposal, a bill on the Hill that would have required radio stations to pay performance royalties for over-the-air broadcasts. And there was a huge concern about that because with the radio industry being in the state that it is, that having to pay that performance royalty on top of the royalties that they already pay to the composers of the music under ASCAP and BMI and publishers and CSAC, that it was just going to be the straw that would break the camel's back. And, you know, it was pointed out that, well, you know, stations already pay royalties for streaming. Why don't they pay? Why shouldn't they pay royalties for over-the-air broadcasts? Or, you know, my response to that is, well, actually, it is precisely the royalties for streaming that is preventing many stations from streaming at all.
So it may be that that's an area that really needs some intense study and maybe some proposal in terms of modifications to the existing copyright laws.
Yeah, I certainly think so, and I would be inclined to think that many of the radio broadcasters sitting around this table would agree.
Operator, I can tell you that is what was one of the major hindrances in our really investing in advancement in the 90s.
Yeah.
We looked at it and said, we would like to be there, but we can't afford to be there.
Right.
And the ambiguity that was around what could come up in the future further said there was too much risk to invest in getting into the internet. But I would like to say that the OCBO has a great opportunity to broker a partnership. Radio has credibility that's unmatched, and that's why we aren't losing the audience that other media is losing. What we don't have is the dexterity of broadband. Broadband in minority communities doesn't have the credibility. So here you have one entity without the credibility and the other one without the technology. If we put them together, meaning having strategic partnerships, radio can help adoption rates exponentially. Radio can be a great salesman for doing that. And because in African American communities in the United States, one of the problems with adoption is there's no credibility. Why should I buy into it? And it hurts the our whole economy and the community, because broadband is one of the pathways to education. Broadband is one of the pathways to employment, et cetera. So it becomes in the public interest to help radio be a champion for broadband. And also that can be part of the funding opportunity to help radio make that transition from where it is now. I want to make sure that not only people here, but people listening understand why it's so difficult to make that transition. I'm a big fan of Mario. I was part of a company that invited Mario to be on one of our operations early on. He's a brilliant talent, and you're going to hear a lot more from young men like Mario. And one of the challenges we have is we always wanted, Mario wasn't in the room when we had these meetings in boardrooms and at the seventh level of seventh floor of Radio 1. And when I was
They wouldn't let me in. I was not going to want to do it. No,
you didn't read the email? The challenge here is that 4 or 5 years ago, radio was at $21 billion. It's now at $13 billion. That's all radio. Black radio, it's even worse than that. And I want to make sure we get this because it has affected the Native American community as well as the Latino community in the same ways. So you had the economy, then you have the personal people meter, which really was a dragon slayer. And it really hurt urban radio even more because 100 rating points that we were selling under the diary model shifted to 70 rating points. So an advertiser was buying 100 rating points before, all of a sudden now that for that same audience, the measurement says, oh, you only have 70 rating points. So I'll just reduce your budget. And it wasn't 70 rating points. It was the same audience, but the difference was like if you're driving a car and you're driving 70 miles an hour because you're going by miles per hour, and then all of a sudden you go to Europe and you're driving at 125. Well, 125 kilometers is equal to 70 miles an hour. Well, that same speed is just a different measurement. But the ad community did not look at it that way, and they discounted urban radio. So now urban radio is fighting just to keep the bank away, and it can't invest in its future because it's fighting for survival every day. So it can't hire the young, bright minds like the Marios that it wants to hire because it can't afford it. And because we see it. I asked the CEO of Google about 5 years ago, what do you think we should do if you were in my place running radio and not where you are now, but knowing what you know? And he told me, he said, I'd hire young people. And at the time, I understood it intellectually, but I only got it emotionally about 3 or 4 years later. That was the most brilliant single thing he could do. Now, public radio is further ahead than commercial radio. Public radio gets it. Well, maybe they're smarter than us. I'm going to try to make some calls later. But I've been studying what they're doing, and it's fascinating. It's a glimpse of what commercial radio is doing. And later we can talk about some of those models. But that's a glimpse of it. It's just that we see some models we can execute. There are companies that are creating apps for mobile right now, for radio right now. I think Fred Jacobs Media has one that's excellent for it. They just launched a brilliant app for C-SPAN that catapulted C-SPAN about 3 or 4 months ago. And so there's a lot of new things going on that are very interesting, but we can't get there from here as broadcasters.
Well, what can commercial radio learn? Are there things that you can learn from the NPRs, public radio of the world?
Can I say, I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned NPR because you're right, NPR is ahead. But NPR is a content provider. You know, NPR doesn't own radio stations. They have affiliates, but I think because they don't own radio stations, they're like PBS that doesn't own TV stations. You know, it was easier, I think, and for them to see that this is just a pipe.
Mm-hmm.
These radio stations that are affiliated with us is just one of many pipes. And so they could see the big picture of we have to look for other pipes, or we have to always be making sure our content, whether it's in the form of an app, what have you, is constantly on the cutting edge pipes. Whereas many existing minority radio broadcasters, whether it's Radio 1 or whether it's SBS or what have you, they own their radio stations and they have content. And increasingly, I think, you know, you're going to start pushing the envelope, we already are, of, you know, okay, what is radio? I mean, I can ask this question about TV. What is TV? If you have a TV station and you have, you know, local content on your TV station, but the vast majority of your viewers are getting you over a cable, are you a TV station or are you a cable channel? And does it matter? You know, is it really all about the content, or is it about the FCC license that you happen to have to broadcast over the
I think
airwaves?
Jim wants to respond to
Yeah,
that.
I think the problem, Frank has just put his finger on the dichotomy that you live with if you're a broadcaster, which is that you have content to provide, but you also have a fixed cost of that tower, that studio, those monthly electric bills to broadcast. So the problem is that from a consumer viewpoint, they don't care how they receive your content. But you bought a radio station, you went to the bank, you borrowed X amount of money, you gave them a business model. The model said, I need to spend X amount of money every month to maintain the hardware. I need to pay X number of people every month salaries to keep the content flowing out of the hardware. And those costs are fixed. So when the industry changes and the value of your pipe goes down and the advertisers are paying you less for the value of the pipe, the costs of the pipe don't change. And that's the problem is yes, we can, you know, take the content and put it on other platforms, but we bought a business model that says this is the amount of revenue that has to come in to maintain the pipe. And that's the situation we're in, is that we can't lay off the engineers and the people who make the pipe work. And that is why, you know, looking at other models, if they produce less revenue to sustain the pipe, they're not the answer.
Yeah. And I got to jump in here, because the paradox is the fact that it's frequently this, you know, increasingly depreciating pipe that's the one asset that the lender wants to look at, because if you go to him and you say, I want to, your lender, I want a loan, well, what's the collateral? What can I secure this loan with? Oh, well, it's, you know, it's an internet site. It's content. And we're like, well, you know, yeah, well, that's all well and good, but, you know, I want a piece of real estate, a studio and a tower, and, you know, and to the extent that I get an FCC license, so that at least I have something that I can sell if you don't pay your loan off. So, you know, frequently for the broadcaster, it is those tangible assets that enable what little money that's coming in to come in.
And the most tangible asset of all of those is the stick value of the radio station,
right,
and that's being devalued by the investors. They no longer recognize the stick value at the same rate that they did just 5 years ago.
At what point does that cause you to reevaluate what's being put through the pipe?
Well, see, the problem is it's not a content issue. That's the problem, because I don't think
it never becomes one?
Yeah, I don't think that you can say to X radio station in Washington, D.C., okay, you're playing these songs and you're generating this much advertising revenue from this much audience. If you stop playing these songs and play this content over here, your revenue is going to go up, because there's no model to support that. You know, what they've been doing, you know, radio's been doing X number of, you know, things on different formats for X number of years. You know, they've tried a variety of different formats, and if you're a Hispanic station or a black station, you've only got expertise in that particular format. So you can't say, okay, the content needs to change radically in a way that I'm not an expert in doing. So if the content's going to stay the same and the revenues are going to decrease, and I still got to pay the same amount to run the station, because I can't. The problem is my fixed cost plus what I owe to the bank. Because the bank and I got together and we said, okay, this is what we can expect in revenues. This is the cost we've got. This is what the loan is going to run. And so when the revenues change and those fixed costs don't change, then you and the bank are at loggerheads.
Well, suppose you could talk about you not only have your fixed model, but you have expanded eyes and ears, because you now are on different platforms, and you're expanding either your demographics or your reach within a certain demographic, because now your station is accessible on a cell phone. One of the digital applications that has been talked about here at the agency is FM chips in the cell phone. I think Muriel mentioned that as well. It's been talked about mainly in the context of public safety and homeland security, and I think abroad in Europe, Asia, it's a common thing. But that may be something that is another platform. If you can go to the advertiser, if you can go to the bank and say, we have X amount of ears, plus we're now accessible by X amount because of this new pipe or new platform.
And here's this.
Is that something that...
I'll just make one comment, then I'll turn it over to the expert. but what has happened, from what my members tell me, is that the value that the advertiser places on that additional platform, when all the stations created websites and they ran out to advertisers and say, okay, you're going to get X number of listeners that Arbitron says I have, but I'm driving those listeners to my website, and then you're going to get all these views on the website.
Right.
And the advertiser said, there's no track record of me getting a benefit from driving your listeners to the website. So until I see a financial benefit from that, I'm not going to pay, or I'm only willing to pay a fraction of what I pay for a radio spot, because I have a history of seeing benefit from that. So what's happened is, how do you get the revenue to catch up with the investment in those new technologies? And that's been the problem, is we can invest, or we could invest. I mean, we've got the additional problem now that instead of hiring people, we're laying people off. So when Zamira talked about you need smart young minds who are internet savvy, and the bank is saying, you got 25 people on payroll, you're running X deficit every month, I want the payroll to be 18 people, and you say, but I want to hire 2 people to do internet work, they're going to say, well, I don't know when well, then you better reduce it down to 16 people then. So you got this tug of war between how you generate new income while you're at a time when you don't have the revenue to cover the investment in doing that. Now, Frank.
Best streams are doing less than 500,000 uniques, and it's hard to monetize that to any significant degree.
I think that, speaking from an old radio guy, because I've been in radio almost 30 years, the radio advertising business has always been the stake. Internet and all these other things as they come around has been the sizzle. The sizzle has gotten more important than the steak, unfortunately. So when the question was asked, all of these economic distresses that we have on our business, does that affect the content? Yes and no. I'll tell you how it affects the content. It affects the content because where we had a morning show that had 14 people driving content and making sure that the 5 or 6 people that were on the air were provided for, now only maybe we have 7 people. Maybe our total personnel has gone from 750 in all of our stations to less than 500. That affects something down the line. You would like to think that your on air isn't affected, but I think you're foolish to think that it won't be. It affects you somehow. We're not unlike the housing market, where many people bought houses valued at X amount of dollars on the hope that it was going to continue to increase in value, because most of us were drunk with that. In the 80s, our stakes rose 10%, 15% as our revenues rose. And the value that banks were putting on your properties were 20 times cash flow, 18 times cash flow. That model has changed completely. And now we're stuck with people looking at us and saying, you might get 8 times cash flow, but the cash flow has been decreased a lot. So now you have FM radio stations being sold in a market like LA for $70, $60 million, where 10 years ago you were looking at $250, $260 million.
So,
what you were saying earlier, you said that people, broadcasters, got lazy, and then because so many of them made so much money doing nothing other than maybe buying and flipping a stick at, like you said, 17, 18 times cash flow in the late 90s, when they took a year or two break in 2000, 2001, they were like, hell, let's do it again.
Right,
And
exactly.
now they were buying at the top of the market, and then when the bottom fell out, because everybody figured, well, prices are never going to go down, right? So I don't care how much that house is worth now, it's always going to go up. Let's buy it high, because it's only going to go higher, and then when the
I
bottom
think
fell out.
Muriel has a comment here.
No, a question and then a comment, because what we're hearing, and it's absolutely true. I do get a chance to meet with radio stations and have consulted some media folks in the past. I've worked with other organizations to help them try to figure out ways that they can navigate this economic turbulence that we're in and leverage technology to help. But James is dead on target, and so is Zamira with the issues. The question that I have for James, Zamira, and Frank, and then I'll have a comment real quickly, is do you think that, because obviously we're seeing the number continue to go this way, and it's not showing really any signs of going up, maybe slowing down, but certainly it continues to show signs of going down. Does everyone agree with that?
Number. Valuations, audience?
Well, revenue.
Revenue, okay.
Or you could, well, revenue. Let's just stay with revenue for a second. My question is, do you think that the advertising industry can be changed? The mentality of how they purchase radio, can that be changed?
I'll let the chief revenue officer take it, or the senior vice president over here take a shot.
There was a Forrester study done just recently where it took 204 of the top marketers in the United States and asked them where they're taking their money. 60% of them said that they were taking their money from traditional radio or traditional media and moving it to new media. And that's a huge number, 60%. And so as tough as it is today, there is no short term, meaning in the next 3-4 years, or next couple of years, where we see a sea change back to traditional radio. Marketers have bought into the fact that that's the place to be. So we have to change that. What we would like to do is have it change with the owners who have invested so much in the medium today. It will change. The tragedy could be that we don't change in time for the existing owners, and they end up losing their operations, and then all these groups and stations go into receivership, and the new guy or gal comes in, buys them at cents on the dollar, and then they execute
skyrocket
and turn it around.
So
that's the worst case scenario.
That's a perfect. I'm so glad you painted that picture, because I think that's proof in the pudding. I think what we're still dealing with is what we used to have, and what we're trying to hold on to. And when I understand the financial issues, but right now we're dealing in a country that has some of the best talent laid off. Some of the best talent is available for hire at reduced rates. People want to work, and they can wear multiple hats. We aren't talking about people that have one defined line of doing work. People that are used to being able to straddle across multiple disciplines and leverage technology across that. So I really am begging the industry to refocus on the fat in the payroll. If they really are serious about reinvesting, look at how you can hire people that are laid off now, either as a consultant, no benefits, freelancer, or part-time. I know countless organizations that do this well for technology reasons, not necessarily in the radio business, but in media business. And let me tell you, I know organizations that don't even have a person in their office handling their social media strategy, and it's working. And they're paying pennies on the dollar, if you will, by not having to try to find someone, bring them in-house. So that's one point. Number two is, how many stations, and James, you brought this up, and this was so critical, because you said, how do we prove when the websites were like, yeah, we're going to flood the websites, and people are going to flock to this, and we all know that really didn't take off. It didn't take off the way it was supposed to. And now we have banner blindness, where people don't even want to click on banners to some degree within websites that are doing well. So here's the thing. I went out to several sales calls with people trying to pitch my content to sponsors with radio folks, keep them nameless, and they positioned the web as such a secondary, I don't even know if it was secondary. I think it was just like
tertiary.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It was like, oh yeah, and by the way, after you do all that, we can also, we can throw this in. That mentality has to shift. We are feeding the advertisers and the brands.
Mario,
we can throw this in, and when we do that, we devalue let me finish my point.
Sure.
We devalue the exact property that we're trying to sell. Lastly, I'll say this. I go to some of these stations and I ask the person running the business, have you ever looked at your web analytics? Some of them don't even know what I'm talking about. Web analytics, they got a website they invested in, was supposed to do X, it didn't. They refocused back to what they were used to making money on, so they left that alone. And now they haven't been tracking, to James's point, what the website's been doing for the past 3 or 4 years, to now say, holy smokes, we're doing better on the web, I don't know, could be, better on the web than we are actually on air. And if analytics are key to getting advertisers to spend money, the web analytics and mobile analytics, you cannot refute that proposal when you put it. It at that point becomes whether or not the ad agency sees value in working with you, period, end of story. Because if you put apples to apples down and the money is budgeted as it is, they're going to spend where they're going to get the biggest bang for the buck, has been my limited experience. Certainly not the same, and I beg to, I definitely respect Frank and James and Zamira. They have more experience in that, but I'm talking about my new experience in this.
Let me speak to you about your new experience and how I feel about that. You have to look at the timeline, okay? The timeline of where the Internet came about as far as radio stations are concerned. The advent of the Internet and us having web pages and so on and so forth came about when we were doing exceedingly well. It came about in the 80s. We were making money hand over fist. So what happened with this? We saw this new little toy, and you know what we called it? Value added. Okay? And that's the anchor and the albatross that's sitting on most radio stations and their websites. Because they've sold that to their advertising community as something that's an option, a throw-in, value added. No dollars associated with it. We're now trying to catch up to that, okay? Some of the innovative things that we've tried to do, okay, I'll give you an example. We've looked at an industry that's dying, which is the record industry. Dying so much they're looking for us to pay the bill, which is funny to me, but that's a whole different story. That's a whole different panel, and I'm not going to get into that. But we've looked at that, and we said, is there a way that we can help them? What's affected the record business more than any other business? The Internet. So what we did on a couple of occasions is that we've taken a major star that has a record release and done a webcast on it on all our radio stations, okay, where people have a chance to talk to the artist and so on and so forth, and we run that on our radio stations. So now you have web and you have radio. And that's one way you try to integrate this thing to a sagging business, trying to go back to them and saying, we're not the ones that killed you, but we can try to help you out.
That's brilliant.
Okay? That's great.
Exactly.
And that's exactly the kind of innovation and creative thinking that we're talking about. We have come to the end of our time here. I'm sure there's lots more that could be said. I am just thankful that for all of your comments and your expertise to talk about this very vital an imperative for radio, for minority radio to thrive and to be viable as an industry. As we said in the beginning, this is an opening conversation. We didn't expect that we would solve all of the problems here, but we certainly have talked about some of the etchings of what radio will begin to look like in the future. And we want to continue this conversation. We hope that this is an incentive for all of you to think about ways that you can marry traditional radio, as Zamira has pointed out, the traditional value, the legacy of radio, and marry that with the new technology so that it goes forward and that 10 years from now we're talking about a vibrant industry. We also talked about things that possibly we could do as regulatory agency, as the government, if there's statutory things that are in the way. There are partnerships, collaborations that need to be thought about, that need to be advanced. There are new ways of thinking. There's, I guess, an educational mindset that maybe, that needs to take place within perhaps traditional media. New ways of thinking about doing the same thing. So there's lots of challenges out there. The industry has to be Darwinian. It is adapting, it is changing, and I think that it has a bright future. And I thank all of you for all of your comments. We look forward to you continuing with us in our mission as we advocate for you. Rick, would you like
Well, I think you said it very well. I would just add that I certainly, from the Department of Commerce, have been challenged and want to think through, thanks to this conversation, about what is the role of government as a catalyst. What is this public-private partnership? Because I'm confident that that's precisely what it's going to take to help make this transition. And as an agency, as you talked about earlier, where we're investing heavily through our Census, I mean, how do we make these decisions? Are we really getting the value add for the investments? And you know, what will that look like in the future across the government? So I'm challenged to think as well and remain open to your thoughts and ideas on the government's role in this whole process as well. It's been very beneficial.
And last but not least, of course, we want to thank our new chairman, Chairman Janikowski, for supporting what we do, our new commissioners, and our new director of OCBO, Thomas Reed.
That was fun. Nice meeting you.